everybody, Joseph Rothschild here, aka MBT, and I've got a little bit of a different video for you today. So today we're going to be talking about playing Genesys, specifically playing Genesys at the 2026 North American World Championship Qualifier. In case you haven't heard, this is the first event in a series of events that will enable the individuals who came to play the main the opportunity to play Genesys. It will be hosted on a different day than the main, rather than concurrently as the last several YCSs have done. This is phenomenal, and analogous to how they already host these in the EU. Friday of the WCQ is going to be entirely Genesys, Saturday will be entirely Advanced, and then Sunday will be Day 2. If you happen to make Day 2 in both, you can select which of the two you would like to play. For this reason, I've had a lot of individuals who are advanced only in my DMs asking if I can give them a quick and dirty about Genesys. So today I thought we would do just that, a masterclass in what decks you can expect to see at the event, how to build and play your decks, and hopefully a plea that will get some of you who weren't intending to play Genesys to dip your toes in the format. This is really kind of the make or break for this format. The WCQ precludes an entire season of regionals that are Genesys specific. So if you want to hit the ground running on those, you can do so at this event. Unfortunately, after putting all this together, Stevie Blunder made this video first. I really can't complain. If you go and look at his video, it's very well made. It's almost tit for tat what I wanted to say, and as a result, this feels a little superfluous. But that's never stopped me before. I think he focuses a little much on tier lists and what decks are better than others. Personally, I believe the format to be wide enough that you have to have a working understanding of what the top tier threats are, as well as more general principles that can help you regardless of your matchup. So hopefully the Venn diagram of our videos will leave enough space on either side that you can get something out of both of them. So without further ado, here's yesterday's gameplay, today's Farfa Memes, a Genesian manifesto written by MBTH32 with help from Google pre-built templates. So first, for those of you with no working understanding of Genesys, what is Genesys? I'll just real quickly delineate the rules to you here. There's no links legal, no pens legal, and no ban list to speak of whatsoever. Every card that has ever been printed is allowed in Genesys, but the powerful cards have an associated point total. As a result, your deck can't contain more than 100 total points of cards. At present, this doesn't box out any individual card. There's nothing pointed over 100. But if you want to play a really powerful card, like VFD, for instance, you are going to have to eschew every other powerful card in your deck. If you want to sign up for the Genesys event at the NAWCQ, you might be thinking, I've run out of time. That is not true at all. Firstly, you can submit your list to Konami through the Neuron app by 2 p.m. Central Standard Time tomorrow, Thursday, July 9th. And if you are not going to be there Thursday, do not worry, you are not alone. In-person check-in for Genesys on Thursday was announced like a week ago, and of course people have already bought their tickets. So Konami has been very responsive to their email and have said, if you can't make it on Thursday, but you can on Friday, shoot them an email, let them know you're checking in late, and they will deal with it. Really, do not use I didn't register or I won't be there Thursday as an excuse not to play this event. I promise you can. If through some disastrous series of unfortunate events you are absolutely not able to play, please, please, please try to play the regional flights that will be running over the course of the weekend. These have better pricing than any side event at the venue, so they are worth your time, and as a result, this video will be worth your attention. So firstly, what's at stake when it comes to Genesys? I talked earlier about this being a make-or-break event for Genesys in particular, but I think it's a make-or-break event for a lot. Firstly is the concept of alternative formats. For some reason, Konami hasn't had much luck in getting Yu-Gi-Oh! Players to play anything other than Advanced. Speed Duel went off like a wet fart. Generation Duels is less than nothing. God forbid we draft a set. As a result, I hope that Genesys doesn't become load-bearing to the concept of alt formats. I would hate for Yu-Gi-Oh! To miss out on an opportunity for a player innovation like Modern to reshape what Yu-Gi-Oh! Can be. Secondly, in a very material sense, what's at stake is some crazy pricing. Not only are the regional flights really fantastic, the mat is unbelievable, but the pricing for the main event is analogous to the pricing for the actual WCQ, so do take it seriously. And third, viewership. Even if you're not playing these events, it would really behoove you to watch them. I know that a lot of people came away from YCS Columbus's Genesis matches with kind of a frustration about the format in general. Trust me when I say I have full faith and confidence in the team to find matches that are more interesting. And I think this format is a lot better than the one about a month ago. So let's flip it again. So for those of you who aren't sold on the concept, I'll give you some reasons why to play Genesys. Rather than go through the Konami sponsored list that you probably heard on that Doug video about yesterday's gameplay and today's cards, I have some real actionable stuff here. The first is that it very quickly becomes engine v engine gameplay. Because some decks can't afford to play powerful non-engine, and because powerful non-engine is so prohibitively expensive with respect to the points list, often the cards in your deck that make up your engine are doing the heavy lifting. And as a result, it feels like you are playing an archetype against an archetype, instead of frequently an archetype bolstered by, a Nibiru and a Droll hoping to beat an opponent who has or has not drawn a Droll. The second is there's fewer auto wins. Especially out of the sideboard, they've done a pretty decent job of boxing out things that resemble automatic victory conditions. And so for that reason, you play a lot more Yu-Gi-Oh!, especially in games 2 and 3. And third is that it rewards deck building. Yu-Gi-Oh! Of course, rewards deck building. I don't want to imply that it doesn't. But the difference in scale here is staggering. Whereas in the TCG, you are usually negotiating over a handful of slots in a deck that's been solved for something like a month or two. In Genesys, you frequently have to rethink every single card in your list because of how it interacts with other cards that are pointed. So I also want to talk about what Genesys isn't, because I think a lot of people enter into this format with expectations that are inevitably not met. It is not yesterday's gameplay, today's cards. There's a reason they ran away from that slogan almost immediately. The gameplay in Genesys is decidedly modern. It is lower powered than advanced, but it still resembles combos that you do in the modern age. You are playing with today's cards in something a little lower powered, but still similar to today's gameplay. It is also not a go first fuckfest. There's that Reddit post that has really just totally besmirched the reputation of Genesys, where they counted how many feature matches went a certain way, and I do want to be clear, I understand that impulse. I'll say that's a result not only of a specific format of Genesys, but also of a very unsolved format. Any situation in which people haven't figured out what they need to be playing against means that the player going first is going to be massively favored, and unsurprisingly that was borne out on the stage. I think you will see something completely different at this event for more than one reason. And 3 is just the B-sides. Sometimes people say Genesys is just a showcase opportunity for the other decks in the pack. Stuff that won't see the light of day in advanced, but will see the light of day in a lower powered environment. I don't think that's true. There's a significant amount of decks in Genesys that aren't necessarily B-sides, but are in fact like old decks brought back to prominence as a result of pilots getting very good at them and points being allocated certain places. Monarch, for instance, has been a mainstay in Genesys since its first tournament, and those cards are old as shit. So let's begin with an understanding of what you can expect when you are sitting down to play a game of Genesys against an unknown opponent. First and foremost, let's talk about non-engine. So unlike the TCG, where you have to keep an eye out for a pretty prescribed series of non-engine, Ash Blossoms, Droll and Lockbirds, Charmies, Nibiru, Fallen and the Virtuous, Forbidden Droplet, here you are much more likely to see a completely different swath of options. The first of which is breakers. Board breakers in this format are exceptionally cheap. Darkhole is a single point. Raigeki is 3, I think. Interrupted Kaiju Slumber is absolutely free. For that reason, you're going to have to be building towards a board that can resist your opponent just wiping the hell out of it. The next thing you'll need to look out for is low-pointed hand traps. These are hand traps that don't take up any space with respect to how many points your deck can play, but do impact the game in some way. Rather than relying on Ash Blossom for a 1-to-1 point of interaction, you may be playing something like a DD Crow. You'll probably have to plan lines around that card, as well as cards like Skullmeister, Hekahan's Godos, and Ghost Ogre and Snow Rabbit, which is pointed very low. Next is in-engine hand traps masquerading as non-engine. In Genesis, one of the sells for playing a deck is it has a card that, if you squint, kind of looks like a pointed hand trap. Crackle Blitzclick, for instance, is maybe a Dominus card if you're not reading too closely, but things like Melfi Rabbies also make a good case for themselves. And finally, Kaiju. Kaiju are completely free, so any deck that puts all of its eggs into one basket is going to have a really tough time. Next, I'll talk a little bit about trends that have emerged over the last couple of tournaments. The first is a move to hand traps. Breakers are still represented, especially out of the sideboard, but a lot of individuals have felt uncomfortable not playing powerful main deck non-engine hand traps like Fuelos, Perulia, and Nibiru. That's because of the existence of decks like Teller and Hero, which have straight-up FTK lines, and decks like White Forest that can functionally just build an unbreakable board if uninterrupted. Because of the availability of cheap breakers, post-board setups have become extremely layered. People have been splashing things like Alistair, the new Invoker, to make Babaron into Gamma Summon lines just to have something to do if their board is completely wiped. Pretty much every deck at the top tables is going to have something to do through the first, second, and sometimes even third equalizer. And third, there is a huge overrepresentation of a few decks in particular. Blitzclick, for reasons that we'll talk about momentarily. Decks that are from the most recent couple of sets, I'm talking about Corey and Bowles, things like Melfi, for instance, and pet decks. Decks that are one-tricked by a lot of dedicated individuals like Labyrinth. So I want to give you a little bit of insight into what I expect the top decks in the format to be, and we'll begin with Blitzclick. Blitzclick is a hard deck to get a handle on. That's because it plays in a very strange and foreign way to individuals familiar with going first build-a-board strategies. The short of it is, a significant amount of the Blitzclicks can reveal themselves in the hand, then target a type of card you control, a monster or a spell trap. They'll then pop that card and summon themselves. And if something else is popped by a Blitzclick, while they're on the field, can get you some sort of advantage as well. Add a monster to hand, add a spell trap to hand. This is in service of their power play, Whisker Blitzclick, which, if a Blitzclick card has destroyed something over the course of the turn, can at any point reveal itself, special up to 3 Thunders from your hand, then pop that many cards on field. While it's on the field, it's also a monster negate by returning a Blitzclick to the hand if an effect is activated anywhere but the hand. This is good enough against a significant amount of decks. It's an amount of removal and follow-up that is too much for a lot of decks to get over. And it comes packaged with a going zeroth plan in Crackle Blitzclick, which can destroy opponents' monsters as early as turn 0 and enable a Whisker Blitzclick while they are setting up. Finally, because you can special summon any Thunder monster off a significant amount of their cards, it is ripe for powerful floodgates. There's a number that are being experimented with, but Thunder King Ryo, at 20 points, is affordable with a deck that otherwise has very few pointed cards. To go through the bulleted list that I've written right here, this deck was functionally tailor-made for Genesis format. It is too low power to be successful in the TCG, but here it is a house. It will also be overrepresented because it just finished pretty high in the Farfa Genesis event. While it wasn't able to make it to finals, it did get more copies in top 16 than anything else. Now, granted, I think that was 4, but still, that's twice as much as the second place in Fairy Tale. The other important part about this deck is it really beats back the narrative that Genesis is a blind first format. This is a deck that has no problem going second and occasionally prefers to. But they may also go first, set a trap, pass, and be in a winning position. If you have your opponent set one inside, don't assume that they bricked and you can play sloppy. What's more, it plays really well with cards that are unpointed in Genesis, like Pear Bear Scare, and against cards like Nibiru, against which it almost never meets the 5, or Fuelos, against which it literally does not summon from the extra deck. It has really challenged notions of sideboarding because there are very few counters to this archetype. One such counter that players have been experimenting with is Pearly Happy Memory, which can prevent your cards from being destroyed, preventing the summon from your opponent's hand and putting them in a more miserable condition. That said, this will definitely be everywhere. Next up is Fairy Tale. The way the Fairy Tale decks work is by using Luna and Matchgiru to get to a rank 4 Fairy Tale Wicat, which will send 2 Fairy Tales from your deck to the graveyard. Usually some combination of Matchgiru, who can be specialed from the graveyard once upon a Fairy Tale, which allows you to summon Fairy Tales during your opponent's turn from your graveyard, banishment, or hand, and Tales of the Fairy Tales, which enables you to fusion summon Fairy Tale fusions. These include an Omni Negate, a weird layered targeted negation, and more. This archetype is low ceiling, but very powerful. It's a B-side archetype from Advanced, and as a result, you will be playing against experienced pilots. While you may get some mileage against Blitzclick against players who don't exactly know the extent of their plays, this one you're going to be up against heavy hitters. It also benefits fantastically from the type of non-engine being played in Genesys. If you can ensure you're not going to be staring down an Imperm or an Effect Veiler, cards like Wicat get a lot better. One upside to this strategy in recent months has been its inclusion of a TCG exclusive card in Mixusa the Confounder and Super Polymerization. This deck can set Super Polymerization by using the effect of Alchemic Magician during the end step, and then activate it on the opponent's turn to take anything alongside the Alchemic, make Mixusa, and threaten a whole litany of powerful spellcaster fusions. Moreover, it has a diversity of builds, often with completely different weaknesses. You're probably familiar with the Vare version, which is popular in the TCG, but in Genesys, there is not only an extremely popular Nekroz variant, which uses Avance and Emilia in order to make Wicat without necessarily committing too much to the field, or an invoked version that uses Alistair the Reminiscent to make a board that is incredibly layered and can cheat out an Endymion evoked Elysium fucker on your opponent's turn. If there's a couple weaknesses to this strategy, the first is that it's very weak to Perulia specifically. It summons a lot from the hand. Secondly, its interaction is sufficiently layered to be powerful into a format with breakers, but it's layered in a specific way. Often, they're going to want to use their Omni Negate, which banishes a card, before Once Upon, which enables them to summon an extra monster if there's a good one in their banish. Often, they're going to want to use a card like Nibiru before Once Upon, which Spellcaster locks you. Often, they're going to want to use a card like Weaver before Weaver might have to leave the field as part of a powerful fusion. For this reason, cards that deal with more than one card at once can occasionally confound their most powerful line. Next up is Teller. Probably the best deck in the room in the strange interim format in which Glorious Gallery was legal but Chaos Origin wasn't. This deck has a lot of eyes on it at present. It is unquestionably the premier 4-slop archetype in the tournament, and 4-slop has been very powerful for almost Genesys' entire history. There's just a lot of rank 4 enablers in the format, and decent enough payoffs for it to be a problem. For instance, it is playing likely surfacing Big Jaws, but also a small hero package including Miracle Ejector, just to effectively get to a 4 with something like a Dusk Crow and a Fountain. This is all in service of a game plan that aims to use the on-theme Teller rank 4s to put up functionally an FTK, an amount of negates you couldn't possibly chew through. Also, sometimes it puts up a literal FTK using a card like Artifact Mjolnir in order to lock your opponent a la Gimmick Puppet Nightmare. Now, the downside to this deck is that it's currently being hated out as best as possible. The inclusion of Nibiru and the Charmies and cards like DD Crow in main decks is a direct result of fear of cards like Artifact Mjolnir deciding the game on the very first turn. Moreover, it actually does lose to the very few floodgates that are legal. For some reason, Konami doesn't seem to classify level modulation cards as enough to be worth a significant amount of points. So some people are packing targeted hate for this deck, despite the fact that doing so is really hard to do in Genesys. Next up is Red Dragon Archfiend, the B-diff for YCS Columbus. This ended up winning the entire thing, and it's not hard to see why. The new powerful support for the Red Dragon Archfiend strategy is unbelievable, and this deck mostly aims to resolve some combination of Power Vice Dragon, Crimson Resonator, the new Synchros, to end on a board that will likely include a Dispotter, a Hot Red Dragon Archfiend Abyss, and some number of thematic trap cards, Red Rain, King's Resonance, and the like. As a result, this places it in the premier uninterrupted build-a-board deck zone. Their end boards are also very layered, so something like a Dark Hole isn't going to automatically beat them. This deck is really well positioned into formats in which single targeted negation and destruction are everywhere. It has so many extenders and so many ways to nullify these cards that it can often just play through 2 or 3 individual pops. It's also, as a result, pretty good at playing through boards. You can get powerful guys on field and leverage the going second effects of cards like Crimson Gaia to do your bidding. That said, it is kind of poorly positioned for this upcoming metagame because it has a huge weakness to both Charmies and Nibiru, as well as the new suite of Breaker that have become very popular. Getting super polyed as this deck sucks, for instance. And finally, the last deck I want to talk about is a class of decks, pet decks. Unfortunately, Genesys is so welcoming to individuals who have been one-tricking the same strategy for the last 10 years, you will face the Grim Reaper. Dyer shared this term with me to refer to someone who has gone 3-0 by the grace of God. You have matched up against them, they're playing a series of cards you didn't know were printed, and they beat you in 5 minutes. Unfortunately, you are going to play against people with such a huge gap in understanding between their deck and you that you'll fuck up the intricacies of their stupid deck that no one's ever read. You have to be able to move past these losses. Sometimes you're going to get Night Train Blue Traveler FTK'd. I'll spend a couple of sentences on other decks I think you might find, but I really want to drive home that Genesys is an exceptionally wide field. You could theoretically play a new deck every single round and play nothing I've talked about today. In case you do, here are some tips. First up is Vanquish Soul. This deck was really popular at the start of Genesys, and it's not hard to see why. It's extremely powerful and mostly does what the pure Vanquish Soul deck does in the TCG. The downside of playing this deck in Genesys is that the point spread is absolutely horrendous. Frequently, this deck will have almost no space whatsoever for pointed non-engine, so as a result, you can play super ignorantly against it. Melfi is an incredibly powerful archetype with new support in Chaos Origin, including a card that just adds 4 Melfi from your deck to your hand. This deck, as a result of having no pointed cards, can load up on pointed non-engine and play something like 21 really strong cards that can functionally just end your turn. The downside of this deck is it is really bad against single target negation and board wipes, both of which are represented in Blitzclick, probably the most popular deck of the format. Dark Lord was a powerful deck at YCS Columbus. This deck aims to resolve Dark Lord Dance in order to make Lucifer, then clone it in order to make Morningstar and just kill you for 9,000 points of damage. It can back this up with cards like Herald of the Orange Light and Green Light, which is why it's on the other deck section, as both of those were pointed recently. Archmage is an exceptionally powerful deck. Its point spread is good enough that it can do the Archmage thing, but unfortunately, what it does is pretty known at this point in time. It puts up an end board that is, under the right conditions, breakable, and though it does have access to non-finito, playing non-finito and its associated counter trap will require you to shave on the powerful non-engine that allows you to beat back opponents' breakers. Labyrinth just got a lot of points back on the most recent point adjustment, and for that reason it's on the other decks because I think someone is going to figure it out. There is nowhere near a set build of this strategy yet, and as a result I'd feel really bad making any conclusions about what it could look like or what its weaknesses might be. Magnet Warrior competes with the other Build-A-Board decks for the slot of most Build-A-Board fuck-off strategy, though it gets to play negation for cards like Nibiru in Koakai Mairu Guardian. It doesn't always have it. Moreover, it got points on the most recent list, which really hurts it because what it wants to do is end on the 50-pointed Naturia Beast, something that's all but impossible with the 33-point Gallant Granite living in their extra deck. Radiant Typhoon is still quite strong. It got more points on the most recent list, which I think puts it out of contention, but I wouldn't be surprised to see it at the event. Cool Toon's a weird one to see on here, given how powerful it is in the TCG, but the way the point spread works out, you kind of have to play it like first wave Cool Toon. This is because Rotary is 40, and likely out of reach if you want to play anything resembling good cards in your extra deck. For this reason, a lot of people are normal summoning Q, then getting a red Nova and pretending it's early 2026. This would be strong, but the best build of the deck allocated its points to the Heralds, which again is no longer possible as they were pointed. Someone will probably do well with this strategy alongside off-meta hand traps that cost few points, but it is known enough, boring enough, and low ceiling enough that I'm not holding my breath. Monarch remains exceptionally powerful and popular, as a lot of people who came back from both 2006 and 2016 love this strategy. What's made it more difficult is the points allocated both to Spellcard Soul Exchange, one of its most powerful options, as well as Eidos. This boxes out the Zaborg build of the deck, which would mill its entire extra, then make you do the same, and probably forces you onto either the domain version with absolutely no pointed non-engine at all, or just eschewing both and playing random good cards. That's something Monarch has done and seen success with in the past, so I wouldn't be too surprised to see it. Some sort of Hecahand Chimera slop has been approaching playable every single tournament. I don't know how it hasn't gotten there yet. I think right now is the best argument yet for the archetype to be good, but it's a combination of decks being able to interact with the stupid setup tools of Hecahands that take a little too long to get to, and the Chimera endboard almost entirely relying on a single uncontested extra deck monster in Guardian Chimera to do anything of note. Exosister is a strong deck and probably one of the premier dimension shifter threats in the meta. The downside to this deck is it only really does the one thing. In a format where people are playing kaijus, it's a little difficult to guarantee that everything's going to remain on board, and if you're not Doug, it's kind of hard to layer your interaction in such a way that you play around everything. White Forest is an extremely powerful deck, and in the hands of a competent pilot, can look absolutely unbeatable. The downside is that it competes with Red Dragon Archfiend in the metagame for status of deck that wins the game if you're uninterrupted. For that reason, a lot of people looking to take games off of Red Dragon Archfiend and to a lesser extent Teller will find themselves rich with answers to this strategy. Clown Crew did get a new card and was expected to be powerful at YCS Columbus, unless you're me apparently, but there's a couple of points against it. Firstly, the metagame has become so much more powerful that a deck that was skirting the edges of playability is probably now lost, and secondly, one of the better decks in Blitzclick does not use the extra deck, so the shuffle effects of the guys are all but moot. Finally, Mimighoul. While the Mimighoul cards are still available, as is Bot Herder, the two powerful builds of this deck were the Lyralisk one, which was pointed to hell, and the Dimensional Barrier one, which was also pointed to hell. With that, I want to conclude with a little bit of tips and tricks for the event proper. Firstly is macro level stuff. You should be scooping early. Like I said earlier, because there aren't a lot of automatic win cards, especially out of the board, frequently you are going to play 3 long, grindy games of Yu-Gi-Oh! If you're in a losing position and think you can take a game 3, do not hesitate to scoop. You have to be pretty strategic about this. The second is know your cards. Because this is a format that rewards a breadth of understanding rather than a depth, you are going to get games off of people by knowing the interactions of your cards better than them. There is a pretty low % chance that the person sitting across the table from you is going to know your deck better than you do. Use that gap in knowledge to your advantage. And then third, play cognizant of the point list. While I just mentioned that decks like Vanquish Soul have a lot of points allocated to their strategy, if you see an opponent lay down a Holisu or a Raisin, you probably don't have to be playing around something like an Ibiru. Next up is the sideboard. A lot of duelists just aren't good at sideboarding. They view the sideboard as a place where you put cards that read you win the game against certain strategies, rather than a toolbox of options that come in here and there. Because the format in Genesys is wide, many people default to the same type of sideboard, regardless of what they're playing. It'll include a spell trap pop, either Cosmic Cyclone if they have the points, or Twin Twister or MST if they don't, a kaiju, a card that wins the game going first, maybe something like Shared Ride if they have the associated points, or something like Unbreakable Xyz Barrier if they don't, a cheap hand trap, a DD Crow or a Skullmeister that they can bring in relevant matchups, but doesn't eat up too much of the point total, and a dealer's choice card, maybe something relevant for an individual matchup, or a Pair Bear Scare in order to win that minigame. If you start seeing a lot of these cards post-board, you can start to draw conclusions about what else you might have to play around. On the note of drawing conclusions, learn to draw your own conclusions. A lot of people come to me asking where they can find lists, and there just aren't very many that are published. I would say the Farfa event that just happened is a pretty good gaggle of lists, but be careful as they were developed for best of one, and their composition, especially the top cut ones, really does reflect that. The Genesys Discord hosts weekly events. They are smaller, something like 30 players, but they do include sideboards and frequently show off new strategies as new people want to try new things. It's a great place to see cutting-edge builds of decks that may not have received scrutiny yet. I would be careful about drawing conclusions based on decks you see on ladder. There just aren't a ton of people. The community right now is small enough that you're going to be running into the same names over and over again. and YouTube videos. Frequently, these are just a result of someone's local metagame or theory crafting, not necessarily something that they've put time into in a competitive environment. And finally, a little note about deck building. One of the cells of the deck you choose can be its point total. A deck that's pointed really low is in a great position to be playing cards that are pointed on the list like Nibiru or the Charmies. A deck that's expensive might have a lot of really powerful cards in it, but no ability to contest an opponent's game plan. So do be factoring that into your decision making. And that's it. I hope against hope that you will be willing to try out the NAWCQ's NAGC this coming Friday. I will see you there. I will be playing Genesys all weekend, and I hope we as a community can make this format really something special. Bye-bye.